Let's be honest, when people talk about the sons of Fëanor, they usually go straight to Maedhros, or maybe Maglor, the poetic one with the haunted eyes. But the real wildfire? The one nobody warns you about until it's too late? That was Celegorm, the most ruthless of them all. Not because he was the strongest, not because he was the loudest, but because he hid something far more dangerous behind his golden hair and noble name. A hunger for power that burned even hotter than his father's. And here's the controversial part. Celegorm wasn't born evil. He was made, forged by loyalty, twisted by betrayal, and sharpened by the curse of the Silmarils. What if I told you that the very same elf who could whisper to wolves would one day betray a princess, lead a massacre, and fall in disgrace, all because of a single blinding ambition? In this video, you're not just going to meet Celegorm, you're going to understand him. From the origins of his fire to the last breath of his downfall, we're pulling back the curtain on one of Tolkien's most misunderstood and dangerously captivating characters in Middle-earth. This isn't a tale of good versus evil. It's a brutal lesson in how loyalty can become poison, and how even the brightest flame can cast the darkest shadow. So buckle up, because once we step into Celegorm's path, there's no going back. If you've been following the tangled web of the sons of Fëanor, you already know we're not dealing with ordinary elves. No, sir. This time, we dive into the storm that is Celegorm, the third son of Fëanor, bold as a wildfire and twice as dangerous. In the world Tolkien crafted, nothing is ever black and white. And Celegorm, he's the definition of a grey area with a sword. His story isn't just about battles and betrayals, it's about power, pride, and the kinds of choices that echo across the ages in Middle-earth. Let's start with his name, Celegorm, also known as Turca Finwë in Quenya, which loosely translates to strong Finwë. Already, you sense the weight he carries. That strong isn't just physical, it's raw willpower, iron determination, and let's be honest, more than a little stubbornness. But names in Tolkien's world aren't just decorative, they're mirrors of fate. They whisper secrets about a character's path, sometimes even before the character knows it themselves. Celegorm's path. It was always going to be wild. He wasn't soft-spoken like some of his brothers. No, Celegorm had this fire in him, one that didn't simmer. It boiled. You could feel it the moment he entered a hall. The tension, the presence, that unspoken challenge in his gaze. He was the kind of person who didn't just walk in, he arrived. You probably know someone like that too, someone whose energy fills the room even before they say a word. That was Celegorm. Now picture this, an elf with the blood of Fëanor pulsing in his veins, a name that meant strength and a spirit too big to be caged. But what happens when that strength isn't tempered with wisdom? That's where things get messy. Because Celegorm's story isn't just about who he was, it's about what he chose to become. And that, my friend, is where the real lesson starts. And to understand how he turned into one of the most polarizing figures in Tolkien's Middle-earth, we've got to zoom in on what made him tick, the heart behind the muscle, the soul behind the oath. And believe me, that begins with his fierce personality and the influence that shaped it. Celegorm wasn't just fire and fury, he was also charm cloaked in danger. There was a magnetic pull to him, the kind that drew people in even when they knew they should probably run the other way. He had that rare blend of leadership and recklessness, which, let's face it, makes for a captivating mix. And when he spoke, people listened, not because he begged for attention, but because he demanded it effortlessly, instinctively. He was born to influence, even when that influence ran dark. One of the biggest forces shaping him was Orome, the Vala, known as the Great Hunter. Celegorm spent time in Valinor under Orome's tutelage, and it changed him forever. We're not talking about basic archery lessons. We're talking deep communion with nature, mastering the hunt, understanding the pulse of wild things. That's Why, he could speak to animals, literally. He didn't just command them, he understood them. A gift like that, it makes you dangerous. It makes you unpredictable. Imagine walking into a world where beasts obey your will, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. That's what Celegorm could do. Think of it like having a personal army that doesn't sleep, doesn't betray, and never questions you. It's no wonder he walked with such confidence. But there's a fine line between connection and control, and Celegorm danced all over it. You see, the same empathy that could tame a wolf could also be twisted to manipulate a crowd. But if there's one relationship that really defined him, it was the bond with his brother Curufin. The two were inseparable, like twin storms feeding off each other's energy. If you've ever seen two leaders who amplify each other's worst impulses instead of balancing them out, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Alone, they were dangerous. Together, they were nearly unstoppable and sometimes tragically blind to the destruction they caused. And that brotherhood, intense, loyal, and toxic all at once, is exactly what carried Celegorm into the heat of some of Middle-earth's bloodiest decisions. Because influence doesn't always come from what you know, it comes from who you stand beside. And when those alliances turn toward war, what follows isn't always glory. Once the Noldor turned their backs on Valinor, everything changed. Celegorm, like his brothers, swore the infamous Oath of Fëanor, that binding promise to reclaim the Silmarils no matter the cost. And that's where things started getting really intense, because when you swear something that deep, that absolute, you're not just making a vow, you're giving up your peace, your rest, and sometimes even your soul. Celegorm didn't hesitate. He was all in. In Tolkien's Middle-earth, war isn't just about swords and shields, it's about motives. And Celegorm's motive was crystal clear: power through loyalty to the oath. During the early battles in Beleriand, he carved out territory like a warlord staking his claim. With Curufin by his side, he took over Himlad, a region of strategic value, and fortified it with the precision of a predator preparing to pounce. His movements weren't random, they were tactical, calculated. That's the side of him people forget. But even with all that firepower, they couldn't stop the tide. During the Dagor Bragolach, when Morgoth launched his assault with rivers of flame and beasts of shadow, Celegorm was forced to abandon Himlad. It's one thing to lose a battle, it's another to lose your sense of invincibility. And Celegorm felt that loss in his bones. For a man who thought himself untouchable, that was a wound pride couldn't hide. And when pride is wounded, decisions get dangerous. Still, he didn't stop. He joined forces again for the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, a name that already tells you how it ended. Betrayals, broken alliances, and unthinkable losses, and right in the middle of it, Celegorm, swinging swords and commanding troops, trying to claw back what the Noldor had lost. But by this point, the war wasn't just against Morgoth, it was against time, fate, and the weight of their own cursed decisions. These battles left more than scars on the battlefield. They burned cracks into Celegorm's very identity. His cause became obsession, his strength turned bitter, and the exile that followed was more than physical, it was spiritual. And it was during this exile, roaming on the fringes, that Celegorm's next fateful and fatal choice began to form. Now here's where Celegorm's story starts turning darker, a lot darker. During his exile, he crosses paths with Luthien, the elven princess whose beauty, courage, and will were the stuff of legend. At first, it looks like Celegorm might be her ally. He helps her, sure, but not out of pure intentions. This wasn't some fairy tale rescue. It was strategy, cloaked in charm. Because once he realized who she was and how much power her story carried, well, that's when his mask began to slip. Together with Curufin, he seized the moment, not to fight for good, but to secure political advantage. They imprisoned Luthien in Nargothrond, not out of cruelty per se, but control. And that's the thing about Celegorm. His actions often wore the mask of nobility. "It's for the greater good," he might have said. But deep down, it was ambition. Cold, sharp ambition. He wanted to marry Luthien, not out of love, but for leverage. And if that meant denying her freedom, so be it. You see, in Tolkien's Middle-earth, betrayal doesn't always come with swords. Sometimes it walks in softly, wearing your brother's voice or hiding behind a charming smile. Celegorm's betrayal wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. He tried to use Luthien's story to reshape his own, ignoring her will entirely. That's not leadership. That's domination, disguised as destiny. And Luthien, she wasn't having any of it. Her defiance shattered the illusion. When Luthien escaped with the help of Huan, Celegorm's own hound, yes, his own, it was poetic justice. Huan chose loyalty to truth over loyalty to his master, and that tore Celegorm apart more than any blade ever could. Imagine your closest companion turning away from you because your heart had veered too far from honor. That's a moment of reckoning no warrior can escape, and from there, everything unraveled. The trust he once commanded vanished. The strength he once exuded, it now smelled like tyranny. But Celegorm, stubborn as ever, wasn't done. He still had one obsession left, the Silmarils, and chasing them would lead him into one last, brutal chapter. Celegorm wasn't the kind of elf to quietly fade into the background. Even after betrayal, exile, and a world turning its back on him, he clung to the oath of Fëanor like a man clings to a sinking ship, hoping, against all odds, that obsession could still lead to redemption. But by now, it wasn't about justice. It was about possession, about pride, about proving something even if no one was left to see it. That's the tragedy, when your mission stops serving the world and starts devouring you. And so, he turned his eyes toward J.R.R, the son of Beren, and Luthien, who now held one of the Silmarils. That jewel, once the symbol of beauty, light, and purpose, had become a curse. Celegorm and his surviving brothers launched a vicious assault on Doriath to reclaim it, but this wasn't a noble battle. This was a massacre, the kind that stains even the memory of your name. And when the dust settled, there was no victory, just bodies, blood, and silence. Celegorm died in that attack, not as a prince, not as a legend, but as a warning. He fell not at the hands of Morgoth, but in pursuit of something he was never meant to own. That's the twisted poetry of it all. He wasn't slain by evil, he was consumed by his own fire. It's like chasing a mirage until you're lost forever, in the desert. And if you think about it, how many people do you know chasing things that are slowly turning them into someone they were never meant to be? But even in death, Celegorm left behind a ripple, a story that forces us to look at ambition differently. Tolkien never makes it simple. Heroes fail, villains charm, and sometimes the line between them is drawn in desperation, not destiny. Celegorm wasn't purely evil. He was misguided, intense, shaped by legacy and loyalty to a father whose flame burned too bright. And sometimes that's the deadliest inheritance of all. Still, one question remains. Amid all this blood, betrayal, and broken oaths, how did Celegorm look? Did his appearance match his fiery spirit? Believe it or not, that detail has stirred more debate than you might imagine. You'd think that with everything Celegorm did, wars, oaths, betrayals, his hair would be the last thing anyone talks about. But nope. In the deep corners of Tolkien fandom, there's a surprisingly heated debate. Was Celegorm blonde? And here's the twist, he might have been. Despite being a Noldor, and the Noldor traditionally having dark hair, there are clues scattered, like breadcrumbs through the texts, that suggest he stood out in a very visible way. In the Silmarillion, there's no explicit color given. But if you dig into Tolkien's letters, early drafts, and the history of Middle-earth volumes, you'll find hints that Celegorm might have inherited a golden mane, possibly from his time with Orome, or even as a rare trait passed down through the elven lines. In fact, one version describes him as Celegorm the Fair. And no, that doesn't just mean handsome. In elvish usage, it often refers to light coloring. Now imagine the symbolism: a blonde warrior among dark-haired brothers. Someone who looked different, stood out, and maybe even leaned into that difference with pride. It fits, doesn't it? Celegorm was never one to blend in. His appearance would have only reinforced his identity as the untamed flame, the wild card, the one who followed nature's path even when it veered off the map. That look, if true, would have made him unforgettable, even in a crowd of kings. But here's the bigger takeaway. In Tolkien's Middle-earth, outward appearances often mirror inner truths. Celegorm's lighter hair could be seen as a reflection of his unique bond with nature, or even his divergence from the traditional Noldor path. It's a subtle nod, perhaps, to how his soul beat to a different rhythm, even when that rhythm marched him toward ruin. Appearance, in this case, wasn't vanity. It was prophecy in disguise, so the next time someone dismisses Celegorm as just another son of Fëanor, remind them he wasn't just a soldier. He was a symbol, a force of nature, a flame that couldn't be tamed. And his story, it's not one you simply read, it's one you wrestle with. Because his ambition, his power, and his fall speak louder than any legend carved in stone. Now that you've seen the rise and fall of Celegorm, ask yourself this: how often do we chase something so hard that we lose sight of who we are? How many people around us wear the mask of loyalty while slowly becoming a prisoner to their own ambition? Celegorm wasn't just a cautionary tale inside Tolkien's legendarium. He's a mirror for us. For every time we've let ego speak louder than wisdom, for every moment we've mistaken control for purpose, what would you have done in his place? Would you have broken the oath, walked away from the curse, or like him, marched on with fire in your veins, hoping to find glory at the edge of ruin? These aren't just fantasy questions. They're real-life reflections on power, pride, and what legacy we choose to leave behind. So before you move on, think about this. Is there a Silmaril in your life? Something you've been chasing that might be blinding you to what really matters? If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think twice about ambition, loyalty, or how quickly honor can turn to obsession, then this is just the beginning. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join this journey through the deeper truths hidden in Middle-earth. There's a lot more to uncover, and trust me, the best stories are the ones that make you question your own.